My parents removed me from their will and handed my sister the $6 million family estate. Mom smirked and told me I was always their biggest disappointment. 5 years later, my lawyer called their lawyer. When Dad heard what I had built on my own, he could not stop repeating that it was impossible. My name is Kendra, and at 32 years old, I learned that family loyalty has a price tag. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. The heavy oak door of Mr. Sterling's office clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside a room thick with tension and the smell of expensive leather. There were no pleasantries, no warm greetings. My mother Vivian sat perfectly straight in her designer suit, her expression entirely devoid of maternal affection. Without a single word, she reached into her pristine handbag, pulled out a crisp $1 bill, and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It came to a stop right in front of me. I looked down at George Washington's face and then up at my mother. "This is your portion, Kendra," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "The rest of it, every single asset of the Dubois estate is going to your sister." The Dubois estate was a cornerstone of black wealth in Atlanta. $6 million of prime real estate and generations of history swept away in a single gesture. I looked at my father Derek sitting beside her. He was leaning on his silver-tipped cane, adjusting his tie as if this was just another business transaction. And then there was Jasmine, my older sister, sitting next to her husband, Terrence. Jasmine wore a smug, self-satisfied smile that barely disguised her greed. Dad cleared his throat, refusing to meet my eyes directly. "We have made this decision based on what is best for the legacy of this family," he began, sounding like he was reading from a script. "Jasmine has her Master of Business Administration from Clark, Atlanta. She understands the weight of our name. And Terrence here is an alpha with a solid background in wealth management. They have the pedigree and the network to take the Dubois estate to the next level." I almost laughed in the word pedigree. Terrence was a man who wore suits that were too tight and drove cars he could barely afford the lease on. Wealth management was a generous term for what he did, which was mostly shaking hands at charity galas and spending my sister's money. "And what exactly am I, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The liability," he replied without hesitation. Finally looking at me, his eyes were cold. "You dropped out of the corporate world to start some nameless debt fund. You threw away every connection we gave you. You refused to join the right sorority, you refused to attend the right events, and you are a liability to this family, Kendra. We cannot trust you with a $6 million estate." The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer, sat nervously at the head of the table, shuffling papers, pretending not to notice the emotional execution happening right in front of him. For my entire life, I had been the scapegoat. The one who worked twice as hard, just to be tolerated, while Jasmine was handed the world on a silver platter because she played the part of the perfect socialite. I reached out and picked up the $1 bill. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not scream about the unfairness of it all. I simply folded the dollar neatly in half and tucked it into my blazer pocket. I looked right past my parents and locked eyes with my sister's smug face. "Does Terrence even know how to balance a ledger, Jasmine?" I asked, my voice dripping with quiet poison. "Or is he just going to golf away Grandma's legacy before the first property tax bill comes due?" Terrence erupted. He slammed his fist down on the mahogany table so hard that Mr. Sterling's coffee cup rattled. He stood up, towering over the table, his face flushed with anger. "Watch your mouth, Kendra," he spat, pointing a finger at me. "I have managed more money in a day than your little startup will ever see. You are just bitter because you are getting exactly what you deserve. Nothing." My mother Vivian stood up immediately to defend him. "Do not speak to your brother-in-law that way," she snapped at me. "Terrence is the son we always wanted. He respects this family. He respects our traditions. Something you know absolutely nothing about." I watched them rally around each other, a fortress of delusion and arrogance. They had no idea who I really was, or what I had been doing since I left the corporate world. They saw a quiet dropout. They did not see the founder and chief executive officer of Obsidian Capital, a private equity firm that was already swallowing up distressed assets across the East Coast. They thought I was poor. They thought I was powerless. Jasmine leaned forward, her diamond rings flashing under the soft lighting of the office. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. You always thought you were so much smarter than us, just because you sat in your room reading financial law instead of networking, she said, her tone condescending. You thought you were better than the parties and the social clubs. Well, look where it got you, Kendra. You are sitting here completely cut off and utterly alone. We are the future of the Dubois legacy. You are just a footnote. I nodded slowly, absorbing every word, committing their faces to memory. I turned to Mr. Sterling, who was desperately trying to make himself look invisible. Make sure the legal transfer is airtight, Mr. Sterling, I said calmly. Because when they leverage this estate to fund their country club lifestyle and default on their loans, I do not want them finding any loopholes. My father slammed his cane against the floor. Enough, he commanded, his voice booming through the room. We are done here. Terrence, toss her the keys. Terrence smirked and reached into his pocket, pulling out a heavy set of keys to the guest house on the estate where I had been staying. He tossed them across the table. They slid and hit my hands. Have your things out of the guest house by Friday, Kendra, Terrence said, flashing a bright, arrogant smile. Jasmine and I are going to bulldoze it to build a custom cigar lounge and wine cellar. We have contractors coming first thing Monday morning. I picked up the keys, feeling the cold metal against my palm. A cigar lounge. They were going to destroy the house where my grandmother used to bake peach cobbler on Sunday afternoons, just so Terrence could have a place to smoke cigars with his frat brothers. I stood up, pushing my chair back. It scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I smoothed out my jacket and looked at my family one last time. I will be out by tonight, I said quietly. But remember this moment. Remember exactly how you treated me today. Because there will come a day when you realize what you have done, and I will not be there to save you. My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Save us, she mocked. You cannot even save yourself. Do us all a favor, Kendra. When you walk out that door, do not ever use the Dubois family name to beg for a job or a handout. You are on your own now. I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak door. I did not look back. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving them to their victory. My heart was pounding, but not from sadness. It was the steady, rhythmic drumming of pure, unadulterated focus. As I walked out of the law firm and onto the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta, I reached into my pocket and felt the crisp $1 bill. They thought they had stripped me of my legacy. They thought they had left me with nothing. But what they really did was hand me the motivation I needed to destroy their little fantasy world. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer, Elijah. He answered on the first ring. It is done, I said, walking toward my car. They signed it all over to Jasmine and Terrence. Good, Elijah replied, his voice smooth and professional. We just closed our first funding round for Obsidian Capital. $50 million secured and ready to deploy. Where do you want to start, boss? I looked back up at the glass windows of the law firm high above the street. I smiled. Keep a close eye on the Dubois estate, Elijah. I said, my voice cold as ice. Terrence is going to run it into the ground. He is going to borrow against it. And when he does, I want Obsidian Capital to buy that debt. I do not just want to beat them. I want to own them. Understood, Elijah said. I will monitor their filings. It is only a matter of time, Kendra. I got into my car and drove away from the family that had just discarded me. Let Jasmine have her wine cellar. Let Terrence have his fancy suits and his country club memberships. They had the $6 million estate, but they were completely oblivious to the shark circling in the water beneath them. Over the next 5 years, I was going to build an empire in the shadows while they danced on the edge of a financial cliff. And when they finally fell, I would be the one waiting at the bottom holding all of their debts. 5 years is a long time for people who do not know the true value of a dollar, but for someone building a private equity firm from the ground up, it passes in the blink of an eye. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at Obsidian Capital, looking down at the Atlanta skyline. The city was a sprawling chessboard, and I had spent every waking moment of the last 5 years maneuvering my pieces into the perfect position. I did not go to their parties. I did not attend their charity galas. I stayed in the shadows and built an empire out of distressed debt and ruthless acquisitions. My name was never in the social columns, but my company was quietly becoming one of the most feared corporate entities in the state of Georgia. The heavy glass door to my office swung open, and Elijah walked in. He was no longer just my lawyer, he was my chief operating officer and my most trusted confidant. He did not bother knocking. He simply walked over to my massive obsidian desk and dropped a thick black dossier right in the center of it. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Your brother-in-law has been incredibly busy, Kendra," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. He opened the folder and began sliding bank statements and legal filings across the polished stone surface. "I told you we needed to keep an eye on the Dubois estate, and I was right. Terrence is completely drowning." I turned away from the window and walked over to the desk, picking up the first document. It was a ledger of loans taken out against the property. "What did he do?" I asked, scanning the numbers. "What did he not do?" Elijah replied, leaning back and crossing his arms. "He took out a $4 million balloon loan 2 years ago. He convinced your parents that he was going to rezone the estate and develop luxury townhomes. But he never even filed the permits with the city. Instead, he used the capital to fund an entirely different lifestyle. He bought his way onto the board of 2 different country clubs. He purchased a fleet of luxury cars under the estate's name, claiming them as business expenses. He even funded your sister Jasmine's fake charity galas just to keep her name relevant among her old sorority sisters." I stared at the paperwork, feeling a cold sense of vindication wash over me. I had warned Mr. Sterling. I had told them exactly what Terrence was going to do, but my parents had been too blinded by his empty charm and his fraternity letters to see the truth. They handed a generational fortune to a man who only knew how to spend. "So where do they stand right now?" I asked, setting the paper down. "They missed their last 3 payments on the balloon loan," Elijah said, a razor-sharp smile forming on his face. "The lender is a shadow bank, a high-risk credit fund that preys on desperate people trying to maintain the illusion of wealth. They gave Terrence a ridiculous interest rate because they knew the estate was worth more than the loan. The grace period ended yesterday. The bank is preparing to file a notice of default and begin foreclosure proceedings. If that happens, the Dubois estate will be auctioned off on the courthouse steps by the end of the month." I looked at Elijah and then down at the dossier. The home where my grandmother had lived. The land that my grandfather had purchased during a time when black men in Atlanta had to fight tooth and nail just to own property. It was all about to be auctioned off to the highest bidder because my sister wanted to play pretend billionaire. "Buy it," I said, my voice low and absolute. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Buy the property at auction?" he asked. "No," I replied, tapping my finger against the ledger. "Buy the debt, contact the shadow bank, offer to purchase the entire $4 million loan portfolio at a premium if they transfer the servicing rights to Obsidian Capital today. I do not just want to buy the house, Elijah. I want to own my family. I want to be the one holding the leash when the reality of their situation finally sets in." Elijah nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of the play. "It will cost us, but it is a solid acquisition. They have no way to pay it back. I will have the contracts drafted and the wire transfer initiated within the hour. By tomorrow morning, Obsidian Capital will legally hold the mortgage to the Dubois legacy." "Make it happen," I said, turning back to the window. While I was closing multi-million-dollar acquisitions high above the city, a very different scene was unfolding back at the Dubois estate. It was Sunday afternoon, which meant my mother Vivian was hosting her famous post-church dinner. The sprawling dining room was filled with members of the congregation, local politicians, and Jasmine's wealthy friends. The mahogany table groaned under the weight of silver platters and crystal decanters. It was a perfect portrait of Atlanta high society, but it was entirely funded by fraudulent loans. Jasmine was holding court at one end of the table, sipping a mimosa and showing off a diamond tennis bracelet to a group of her sorority sisters. "Terrence just bought it for me as an anniversary gift," she bragged, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "He has been working so hard managing the estate and growing our portfolio. We are actually looking at buying a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard next summer." Her friends cooed and complimented her, completely buying into the facade. But at the other end of the table, the cracks were beginning to show. Terrence was sweating through his custom-tailored shirt. He kept checking his phone under the table, his hands visibly shaking as he declined call after call from unknown numbers. My father, Derek, sat near Terrence, pushing his food around his plate. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. "Terrence," he said, cutting through the chatter, "I saw a notice from the county tax assessor in the mail yesterday. It said we are heavily delinquent on the property taxes. What is going on with that?" The table grew unnervingly quiet. Several guests turned to look at Terrence. Terrence swallowed hard, forcing a tight, artificial smile onto his face. "It is nothing, Dad," he lied smoothly, waving a hand in the air. "Just a clerical error at the county office. You know how disorganized they are downtown. My accountant is already handling it." Derek frowned, leaning forward. "A clerical error that threatens a tax lien," he pressed. "Because the letter stated we owe over $100,000 in back taxes. I thought you said the townhome development was generating revenue." Before Terrence could stumble through another lie, my mother Vivian immediately jumped in to protect him. "Derek, honestly," she scolded, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Why would you bring up business at the Sunday dinner table? Terrence has been doing a phenomenal job. He is navigating a complex real estate market. You just do not understand high-level finance, Derek." Let the man eat his meal in peace. Terrence shot my mother a look of profound gratitude. "Thank you, Mama Viv," he said, taking a desperate gulp of his wine. "Everything is under control, Dad. I promise you the Dubois legacy is stronger than ever." He barely got the words out of his mouth before the heavy brass doorbell echoed through the foyer. Vivian smiled and gestured to one of the hired servers. "Oh, that must be Reverend Thomas," she announced happily. "He said he was going to drop by after his afternoon service. Please show him into the dining room." The server walked into the foyer and opened the massive oak front door, but it was not Reverend Thomas standing on the porch. It was a man in a cheap gray suit holding a thick manila envelope. The man did not wait to be invited inside. He stepped right past the server and walked directly into the formal dining room, scanning the faces of the shocked guests. "Are you Terrence Dubois?" he asked, his voice loud and authoritative, completely shattering the refined atmosphere of the room. Terrence froze. The wine glass in his hand trembled. "Who is asking?" he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. The man stepped forward and slammed the thick manila envelope down onto the dining table right next to Jasmine's plate. "You have been served," he announced coldly. "Notice of default and intent to foreclose. You have exactly 72 hours to satisfy the outstanding debt of $4.2 million, or the bank will seize this entire estate. Have a blessed Sunday." The process server turned on his heel and walked out, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. Jasmine's mimosa slipped from her hand and shattered against the hardwood floor. The sorority sisters stared in absolute horror. The church elders whispered among themselves. The perfect, flawless image of the Dubois family had just been publicly executed in front of the very people they spent all their money trying to impress. Derek stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward. He grabbed the envelope, tearing it open with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the legal document, the color completely draining from his face. $4 million. He gasped, looking up at Terrence. "You took out a $4 million loan against my house." Terrence backed away from the table, holding his hands up defensively. "Dad, I can explain," he stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "It was a bridge loan. I just needed capital to cover the margins. The market turned on me." Vivian stood up, clutching her pearls, her breathing shallow and panicked. "This is a mistake," she cried out, looking at the guests, who were now awkwardly trying to gather their belongings and leave. "This is some kind of terrible misunderstanding. Our lawyers will have this sorted out by tomorrow morning." "There is no mistake," Derek roared, slamming the paper down. "They are going to take the house, Vivian. They are going to take everything." As the guests fled the estate, whispering and gossiping about the dramatic downfall of Atlanta's premier family, Terrence realized he was completely backed into a corner. He looked at my parents, his mind spinning with desperate, chaotic plans. He knew he could not fix this with a phone call. He needed money, massive amounts of immediate liquid capital. And he knew exactly where to get it, even if it meant committing a federal crime to save his own skin. He just needed to convince my mother to blindly trust him one last time. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind the last fleeing guest, leaving the Dubois estate in a suffocating silence. The remnants of the Sunday dinner lay scattered across the dining table like the wreckage of a sunken ship. Half-eaten peach cobbler melted onto fine china. Crystal wine glasses stood abandoned. The pristine image of Atlanta high society had been completely shattered in less than 5 minutes. In the center of the room, my father Derek was pacing, clutching his silver-tipped cane so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a man who had built his entire identity on pride and respect, and he had just been humiliated in his own home. He stopped and pointed the cane directly at Terrence's chest. $4 million, he yelled, his voice cracking with rage. You looked me in the eye and told me the estate was generating revenue. You told me the townhome development was fully funded, and now a process server is walking into my dining room threatening to take the roof over my head. Terrence held his hands up in a placating gesture, his custom-tailored shirt dark with sweat. Dad, you have to calm down, he said, his voice frantic but trying to sound authoritative. That man was just a scare tactic. The lender is a predatory shadow bank. They know the estate is worth double what we owe, so they are trying to force a foreclosure to steal our equity. It is a hostile takeover attempt. Then pay them off. Derek snapped, hitting the floor with his cane. You manage the accounts, Terrence. Wire them the money on Monday morning and clear this up before the church elders start gossiping to the entire city. Terrence swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward Jasmine, who was sitting at the table sobbing into a silk napkin. I cannot just wire it, Dad. Terrence admitted, his voice dropping. The capital is tied up in the development permits and the structural engineering fees. We are asset-rich but liquid-poor right now. I need a bridge loan to cover the shadow bank until the development funds unlock. My mother, Vivian, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, suddenly stood up. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a desperate need to fix the situation. A bridge loan, she repeated, grasping at the financial term like a life preserver. Yes, that makes sense. We just need to borrow the money temporarily to pay off these awful people. Terrence nodded eagerly, stepping closer to her. Exactly, Mama Viv. I already have a private broker lined up who can authorize the funds in 24 hours. But because of the default notice, they will not use the estate as collateral. They need something else to secure the bridge loan, just for 90 days. Derek narrowed his eyes. What else do we have? He demanded. Terrence took a deep breath. They need you and Dad to co-sign the loan using your primary retirement home and the pension accounts as collateral. The room went completely still. Even Jasmine stopped crying and looked up. Derek stared at Terrence as if the man had just lost his mind. Are you insane? Derek whispered. You want me to risk the house I bought with 40 years of my blood and sweat? You want me to put my pension on the line because you mismanaged my family legacy? Dad, it is completely safe, Terrence pleaded, taking a step toward him. It is just a formality to secure the wire. Once the development breaks ground, we pay off the bridge loan and your house is released. If we do not do this, they will seize the Dubois estate by Friday. We will lose everything. I am not signing away my retirement, Derek roared. You dug this hole, Terrence. You figure a way out of it without my pension. Before Terrence could respond, Vivian stepped between the two men, turning her fury on my father. Derek Dubois, you listen to me right now. She hissed, her voice vibrating with panic and misplaced pride. Did you see the way those people looked at us today? Did you see the pity in their eyes? I will not be the laughingstock of Atlanta. I will not have my friends whispering about how we went bankrupt. If Terrence says this is the only way to save our name, then we are going to do it. Vivian, I cannot risk the pension. Derek pleaded, his anger giving way to fear. You are going to sign the paperwork, Derek, Vivian commanded, pointing a manicured finger at him. Terrence is family. He knows what he is doing. He is going to fix this. Derek looked at his wife, then at his daughter Jasmine, who was nodding along with her mother. He was outnumbered and exhausted. He let out a defeated sigh, turning away from them. Get the paperwork ready, he muttered, walking out of the dining room. But if this goes wrong, Terrence, I swear to God I will bury you myself. Terrence let out a breath he had been holding. Do not worry, Dad, he called out. I have it completely under control. An hour later, Terrence was locked inside the estate's home office, the blinds drawn tight. His laptop screen cast a pale blue light across his sweating face. Jasmine paced back and forth behind him, chewing nervously on her thumbnail. "Are you sure this private broker is going to approve it?" Jasmine asked, her voice trembling. "My dad sounded serious, Terrence. If we lose their house..." "We are not going to lose anything!" Terrence snapped, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "But we have a major problem. The broker is not going to approve the loan with just a standard co-sign. Your parents' credit took a hit when we linked their accounts to the estate last year. The underwriter is demanding a full, unconditional pledge of the pension and the primary residence." Jasmine stopped pacing. "What does that mean?" "It means they are not just co-signing," Terrence said, looking up at her, his eyes wild with desperation. "It means they are putting up 100% of the collateral. If we default, the bank does not even have to sue us. They just take the house and drain the pension immediately." "My dad will never agree to those terms," Jasmine said, her face turning pale. "He will read the fine print." "I know he will," Terrence said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Which is why he is not going to read it." Terrence opened a drawer in the heavy mahogany desk and pulled out a digital signature authentication token and a power of attorney stamp my father had given him years ago during a brief hospital stay. He set them on the desk. Jasmine stared at the items, her breath hitching. "Terrence, that is federal fraud. You cannot forge their signatures on a federal loan document. If we get caught, we will go to prison." Terrence stood up and grabbed Jasmine's shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "If we do not do this, we lose the estate. We lose the cars. We lose the country club. You will have to go back to your sorority sisters and explain why you are completely broke. Do you want that, Jasmine? Do you want to be the joke of the entire city?" Jasmine squeezed her eyes shut, tears spilling over her cheeks. She thought about the designer clothes, the exclusive parties, the sheer power of the Dubois name. She opened her eyes and shook her head. "Then log into your mother's email account," Terrence ordered, pushing her toward the laptop. The DocuSign links just arrived. "Approve the digital signatures from her device. I will stamp the physical copies for your dad. We do this right now and the money hits the account tomorrow. We save the estate." Trembling, Jasmine reached for the mouse. She opened Vivian's email, clicked the secure link, and scrolled rapidly to the bottom of the 60-page document. She did not read a single word of the fine print. She just clicked the bright yellow button that said, "Approve signature." In less than 30 seconds, she had signed away her parents' entire life savings and the roof over their heads. Across the city, on this top floor of the obsidian Capitol Tower, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across my polished stone desk. I was reviewing the quarterly projections for our healthcare portfolio when the heavy glass door swung open. Elijah walked in, completely bypassing the guest chairs. He dropped a fresh stack of freshly printed legal documents directly onto my keyboard. "He took the bait," Elijah said, a dangerous smirk playing on his lips. "But he dug a hole deeper than I ever thought possible." I pushed my laptop aside and pulled the documents toward me. "Explain it to me." Terrence panicked, just like you predicted. Elijah began, leaning his hands on the desk. When the process server hit him with our default notice, he scrambled to find liquid capital. He went to a high-risk private broker to secure a bridge loan to pay us off. What Terrence did not realize is that the private broker he used is a subsidiary shell company wholly owned by Obsidian Capital. I looked up at Elijah, a slow smile spreading across my face. "So he borrowed money from us to pay us back." "Exactly." Elijah laughed. "But it gets better. Look at page 42, the collateral pledge." I flipped to the page. There were the digital signatures of my mother and father pledging their primary residence and my father's entire pension account to secure the new loan. Elijah tapped the paper. "Now look at the cybersecurity report attached to the back. Our underwriting software tracks the IP addresses and device MAC numbers for all digital signatures. The signature for Vivian Dubois was executed from an iPhone registered to Jasmine. The signature for Derek Dubois was digitally stamped from Terrence's laptop." I stared at the technical data. The realization of what they had done settled over the room like a heavy winter chill. "They forged the signatures," I said, my voice deadpan. Elijah nodded. He did not just borrow money, Kendra. He committed federal wire fraud and elder abuse. He illegally pledged your parents' house and their retirement. He handed us the legal right to seize every single asset attached to the Dubois name, and he handed us the criminal evidence to send him and your sister to federal prison. I looked down at the paperwork. I saw the address of the house I grew up in. The house where I was told my favorite color did not matter. The house where I was told I was a disappointment. I saw the pension my father had built while ignoring me to praise Jasmine. They had handed it all to Terrence, and Terrence had handed it all to me. If we call this debt in Elijah, said his tone turning serious, your parents are out on the street. They will lose everything they have ever owned. What do you want to do, boss? I stood up from my desk, buttoning my suit jacket. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the glittering lights of Atlanta. I thought about the $1 bill my mother had slid across the table 5 years ago. I thought about being told never to use the family name. Call it in, I said, my voice stone cold and absolute. All of it. Accelerate the debt. Execute the liens on the estate, the primary house, and the pension. Give them 72 hours to pay the $6.4 million. When they fail, I want them standing in this building. 72 hours. That was exactly how long it took for the carefully constructed illusion of the Dubois family wealth to completely disintegrate. I stood by the window of my office watching the morning traffic crawl along the Atlanta streets, knowing that on the other side of the city, a bomb was about to detonate. Derek Dubois stood on the 18th green of the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club, lining up a crucial putt. The morning sun beat down on his crisp white polo shirt. He was playing with 2 city councilmen and a prominent local judge. This was his sanctuary. Here he was not a man struggling with hidden debts. He was Derek Dubois, the patriarch of a respected Atlanta dynasty. He pulled his putter back, ready to strike the ball, when his phone began vibrating frantically in his golf cart. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Excusing himself with a strained smile, he walked over and checked the screen. It was Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer. Derek answered sharply, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Sterling?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "I am in the middle of a round with the judge. Derek, you need to get off the course right now." Mr. Sterling's voice was completely devoid of its usual calm, professional cadence. He sounded out of breath, panicked. "I just received a barrage of legal notices from the county clerk's office. Your accounts are frozen, Derek, all of them." Derek froze, his hand gripping the steering wheel of the golf cart. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "My checking account, my savings, everything. Your personal accounts, your business accounts, the estate accounts, and your pension fund?" Mr. Sterling rattled off the list like a death sentence. "A private equity firm called Obsidian Capital just executed a massive lien on everything you own. They are calling in a debt of $6.4 million, and they have a court order freezing your assets until it is paid." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. The manicured green grass of the golf course seemed to spin beneath his feet. $6 million, he choked out. "That is impossible. I did not authorize any of this." "The paperwork says you did." "Derek," Mr. Sterling replied, his voice filled with dread. "It has your digital signature. They are foreclosing on the estate and your primary house. You need to get home and find your son-in-law right now." Derek did not say goodbye to the councilman or the judge. He left his clubs on the green, sprinted to his Mercedes, and drove back to the estate like a man possessed. He shattered the speed limit, his mind racing through a chaotic blur of terror and rage. He had spent 40 years building his retirement. 40 years of biting his tongue, playing office politics, and sacrificing his own peace of mind to ensure he would never have to worry about money. And in a single morning, it was gone. He slammed on the brakes, skidding into the circular driveway of the estate. He threw the front door open so hard it cracked against the entryway wall. "Terrence," he roared, his voice echoing through the massive house. "Terrence, get out here right now!" Jasmine came running out of the kitchen holding a mug of coffee, her eyes wide with alarm. "Dad, what is going on?" she asked. "Where is your husband?" Derek bellowed, ignoring her question. Terrence walked out of his home office holding a stack of papers, trying to project an air of calm authority. "Dad, keep your voice down," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We have contractors coming to look at the roof." Derek did not say a word. He crossed the foyer in 3 massive strides, dropped his cane, and lunged at Terrence. He grabbed his son-in-law by the collar of his expensive custom shirt and slammed him backward into the wall. The framed family portraits rattled against the plaster. Jasmine screamed, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered, sending hot liquid splashing across the hardwood floor. "What did you do to my pension?" Derek screamed, shaking the younger man violently. "What did you do to my house?" Terrence raised his hands desperately, trying to break Derek's grip. "Dad, wait. Let me explain." He choked out, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "It was a bridge loan. I told you we needed a bridge loan to cover the shadow bank." "I never signed anything," Derek roared, pulling Terrence forward and slamming him into the wall a second time. "My accounts are frozen. Sterling just called me. A firm called Obsidian Capital owns my pension. They own my house. They are foreclosing on everything. You forged my signature, you worthless coward." My mother, Vivian, rushed down the grand staircase, clutching her silk robe, her face pale with shock. "Derek, let him go," she shrieked, running over and frantically trying to pry my father's hands off Terrence. "Are you insane? You are going to hurt him. He stole everything." Vivian, Derek yelled, tears of absolute fury welling in his eyes. He let go of Terrence, giving him one final shove that sent the younger man stumbling onto the floor. "He forged my signature. He pledged the house. The pension is gone. We have nothing." Terrence scrambled backward, clutching his torn shirt collar. "It was just a temporary pledge," he pleaded, scrambling for an excuse. "Obsidian Capital must have bought the debt from the private broker. They are acting aggressively to scare us. But it is illegal for them to freeze the accounts without a hearing." Vivian stood between her husband and Terrence, breathing heavily. She looked at the terrified expression on her son-in-law's face, and then at her furious husband. Instead of accepting the catastrophic reality, she retreated into the only defense mechanism she had ever known: pure, arrogant denial. "Get up, Terrence," Vivian commanded, her voice suddenly cold and sharp. Terrence slowly got to his feet, refusing to look Derek in the eye. Vivian turned to my father. "We are the Dubois family," she said fiercely. "We do not brawl in our hallways like common thugs. If this Obsidian Capital thinks they can steal our property with some predatory financial trick, they are sorely mistaken. They do not know who they are dealing with." Derek stared at his wife in disbelief. "Vivian, they have the paperwork. It is over." "Nothing is over," Vivian snapped. "I have played bridge with half the judges in this city. We have connections. Terrence, go upstairs and put on your best suit. Derek, fix your tie. We are going to drive down to the city right now. We are going straight into the office of whoever runs this Obsidian Capital, and we are going to threaten them with a massive defamation lawsuit. We will bury them in legal fees until they release our accounts." Jasmine nodded vigorously, wiping the tears from her face. "Mom is right, Dad. We cannot just let some faceless corporation bully us. We have to fight back." Derek looked at his family. They were completely disconnected from reality. But a small, desperate part of him wanted to believe Vivian was right. He wanted to believe the nightmare could be undone. "Fine," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Let us go see these people." An hour later, the family Mercedes pulled up to the curb outside the towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed Obsidian Capital in downtown Atlanta. Terrence stepped out of the car, smoothing down his suit jacket, trying to project an aura of wealth and power he no longer possessed. Vivian linked her arm through Derek's, marching through the revolving doors like a queen entering conquered territory. The lobby of Obsidian Capital was an intimidating display of modern wealth. Black marble floors stretched toward a minimalist reception desk. Private security guards in tailored black suits stood quietly in the corners. Vivian looked around, taking in the sheer scale of the operation. "See this, Jasmine?" Vivian whispered, gesturing to the vaulted ceilings. "This is real power. This is the kind of success your sister threw away to go play in the mud with her little startup. Let Terrence handle the talking today. He speaks their language." They approached the reception desk. Terence leaned heavily against the marble counter, flashing an arrogant smile at the receptionist. "I am Terence Dubois," he announced. "I demand to see your chief executive officer immediately. Tell him it concerns a fraudulent lien placed on the Dubois estate. We are prepared to involve our legal team if he does not meet with us right now." The receptionist did not blink. She simply tapped a button on her earpiece. "Mr. Dubois is here," she murmured. A moment later, the private elevator doors opened and Elijah stepped out. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit and carried a single black leather folder. He walked toward the family, his expression entirely unreadable. "Mr. Dubois," Elijah said, his voice smooth and cold. "We have been expecting you. My name is Elijah. I am the chief operating officer here. Follow me, please." Vivian shot Terence a triumphant look. "See," she whispered, "they are already scared." Elijah led them past the security checkpoints and onto the private executive elevator. The doors slid shut, and the elevator shot upward silently, carrying them toward the top floor. When the doors opened, they stepped out into a massive glass-walled boardroom that overlooked the entire city. "Have a seat," Elijah instructed, gesturing to the long conference table. "The chief executive officer will be right in. We have a lot of debt to discuss." Derek, Vivian, Jasmine, and Terence sat down in a row facing the empty leather chair at the head of the table. They braced themselves, expecting an aggressive older billionaire to walk through the door. They were ready to shout. They were ready to threaten. They were ready to use every ounce of their social privilege to intimidate the boss of Obsidian Capital. The heavy oak door clicked open. The heavy oak door clicked open. The soft hum of the building's climate control system was the only sound in the massive room. Derek, Vivian, Jasmine, and Terence all leaned forward slightly, expecting to see the architect of their destruction. They expected a ruthless Wall Street veteran. They expected an older white billionaire. Instead, they saw me. I was sitting at the head of the polished obsidian conference table wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, my hands folded neatly over a pristine black leather folder. The panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline framed me like a portrait, but I did not look at the city. I looked dead into the eyes of the family that had thrown me away. "Have a seat," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying across the expansive room without a hint of emotion. "We have a lot of debt to discuss." For 10 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The sheer impossibility of the moment seemed to break their brains. Derek let go of his cane, and it clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. Vivian raised a trembling hand to her mouth. Jasmine stared at me as if I was a ghost. And Terence, the man who had confidently bragged about his financial genius just an hour ago, looked like the floor had completely dropped out from beneath him. "What is this?" Derek finally whispered, his voice hollow and shaking. "Kendra, what are you doing here? Are you an assistant?" Vivian immediately seized on that logic, her mind desperately rejecting any other reality. "Of course she is an assistant," Vivian snapped, stepping into the room, her heels clicking sharply. "Get up out of that chair, Kendra. Have you lost your mind, playing some kind of sick practical joke on us? Go get your boss right now. We are here to see the chief executive officer of Obsidian Capital." I did not blink. I reached out and pressed a small silver button on the console embedded in the table. The automated blinds silently descended over the floor to ceiling windows, plunging the room into a cool, dim light. A massive projector screen dropped down from the ceiling directly behind me. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Obsidian Capital," I said smoothly. "I founded this firm 5 years ago, the exact same week you handed Jasmine a $6 million estate and handed me a $1 bill. I am the sole owner. And more importantly, I am the sole owner of the $6.4 million in debt your perfect son-in-law racked up." Vivian's face went completely slack. She stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of a leather chair to steady herself. "That is a lie," she gasped, looking desperately at Terence. "Tell her she is lying, Terence." Terence could not speak. He was staring at the folder on my desk, his breathing shallow and rapid. He knew the truth. He had seen the aggressive acquisition tactics of Obsidian Capital over the years. He knew the rumors about the ruthless, invisible chief executive who bought up distressed debt and liquidated assets without mercy. The realization that the corporate monster who had hunted him down was the sister-in-law he had mocked was finally setting in. "You set us up!" Jasmine screamed, suddenly surging forward, her face contorted with rage. "You predatory bitch! You planned this! You trapped us just to steal our money!" I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice, but the sheer weight of my presence brought Jasmine to an immediate halt. "I did not set you up, Jasmine," I replied coldly. "I did not force Terrence to take out a $4 million balloon loan from a shadow bank to fund your country club memberships. I did not force him to buy luxury cars while the property taxes on the estate went unpaid. And I certainly did not force the two of you to commit federal wire fraud." Derek's head snapped toward Jasmine. "Wire fraud," he repeated, his voice cracking. "What is she talking about?" I picked up a remote from the table and clicked it. The projector screen behind me flared to life, displaying a massive high-definition image of the loan collateral agreement. There, in perfectly clear digital ink, were the signatures of Derek and Vivian Dubois. "Terrence told you he needed a bridge loan," I explained, walking slowly around the edge of the table. "He told you he just needed you to co-sign." But that was a lie. Because of the default notice, Terrence could not secure a standard co-sign. He needed a full, unconditional pledge of your primary house and your entire pension. Derek gripped his chest, his breathing becoming erratic. "But I never signed that," he choked out. "I refused. I walked out of the dining room." "I know you did, Dad," I said, my tone softening just a fraction before turning razor sharp again. I clicked the remote a second time. The screen split. On the left was the signature document. On the right was a detailed cybersecurity diagnostic report. "You did not sign it," I continued, pointing at the screen. Jasmine logged into Mom's email account and approved the digital signatures from her iPhone. "Terrence used your digital authentication token and power of attorney stamp to authorize the physical copies. They forged your signatures. They stole your pension and pledged your home to save themselves from the humiliation of going broke." The silence in the boardroom was absolute and terrifying. It was the sound of a family completely tearing apart at the seams. Derek turned slowly to look at Terrence. The older man looked utterly destroyed, stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his legacy. "You forged my name," Derek whispered, tears finally spilling over his weathered cheeks. "I welcomed you into my home. I called you my son. And you stole everything I worked 40 years to build." Terrence backed away, holding his hands up in a pathetic defensive gesture. "Dad, please," he begged, his arrogant facade completely shattered. "I was going to fix it. I was going to get the zoning permits and pay the loan back before you ever found out. The market just turned on me. It was an accident." "An accident!" Vivian shrieked, suddenly launching herself at Terrence. "You miserable, lying coward! You took my home." Jasmine tried to grab her mother. "Mom, stop, it was the only way." Vivian slapped Jasmine across the face with such force that the sound echoed off the glass walls. Jasmine stumbled backward, clutching her cheek in shock. "You are no daughter of mine!" Vivian screamed, her perfectly manicured image dissolving into pure feral panic. "You signed away my house. You signed away my life." I stood at the head of the table, watching the chaos unfold. This was the family that had told me I was a liability. This was the family that had cast me out for not fitting into their pristine high society mold. Look at them now, brawling in a corporate boardroom, turning on each other like starved animals the second their precious money was threatened. "Enough," I commanded, slamming my hand flat against the obsidian table. The sharp crack brought them to a halt. They turned to look at me, panting and disheveled. They were entirely at my mercy, and they finally knew it. I walked back to my chair and sat down, opening the black leather folder. "5 years ago, you told me never to use the Dubois name to ask for a favor," I said, looking directly at Vivian, who was weeping quietly into her hands. "Today you are standing in my building begging for your lives. You want a way out. I am going to give you exactly one option." I pulled 2 thick legal contracts from the folder and slid them across the table. "Option A," I said, tapping the first document. "I hand this entire file over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The cybersecurity report, the IP logs, and the forged documents are all the evidence they need. Terrence and Jasmine will be indicted for federal wire fraud and elder abuse. They will serve a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Furthermore, I will proceed with the foreclosure. The Dubois estate, your primary residence, and the pension will all be seized by Obsidian Capital by Monday morning. You will all be homeless, and Jasmine will be in a concrete cell. Jasmine let out a choked sob, sinking into one of the leather chairs. Terrence fell to his knees, covering his face. What is option B? Derek asked, his voice completely broken, stripped of all the authority he had wielded my entire life. I pushed the second contract forward. Option B is a complete and total transfer of assets. Derek and Vivian, you will sign this document legally transferring 100% ownership of the Dubois estate and your primary residence into my name. You forfeit everything to me. You will walk away with exactly what you gave me 5 years ago. Nothing. Vivian gasped, staring at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. You cannot do that, she cried. Where will we live? How will we survive? I will place you and Dad in a modest 2-bedroom condominium that I own on the outskirts of the city, I replied coldly. I will provide you with a strict monthly allowance for groceries and utilities, but you will have no assets. You will have no country club memberships. You will have no high society dinners. You will live quietly under my rules. And what about us? Terrence croaked, looking up from the floor. I looked at him with absolute disgust. If option B is selected, you and Jasmine will leave the state of Georgia within 48 hours. You will leave with nothing but the clothes in your suitcases. If I ever see either of your faces in Atlanta again, or if you ever attempt to contact my parents, I will execute option A and send the FBI file directly to the district attorney. I leaned back in my chair, closing the black folder. You have exactly 5 minutes to decide. Choose wisely. Jasmine clicked the bright yellow approve button on her screen. Terrence pressed the heavy brass power of attorney stamp firmly onto the physical paper. The trap they built for themselves was finally complete. The morning sun crested over the manicured greens of the Oak Ridge Country Club, casting long, elegant shadows across the dew-soaked grass. It was a perfect Atlanta morning. Derek Dubois stood on the 18th green holding a custom-milled putter. He was surrounded by the kind of men who ran the city, a federal judge and a state senator. This was Derek's element. Out here among the rolling hills and quiet wealth, he was an untouchable patriarch. He bent his knees slightly, lining up a crucial 15-foot putt that would win him the round and secure his bragging rights for the month. Deep in his golf bag, his phone began to vibrate. Derek ignored it, keeping his eyes locked on the hole. The phone stopped. 5 seconds later, it began vibrating again, an insistent, angry buzz that disrupted the serene quiet of the green. The senator chuckled politely and gestured toward the bag. Better get that, Derek, the senator said with an easy smile. Might be your broker telling you the market is up. Derek forced a polite laugh, handing his putter to his caddy. Excuse me, gentlemen, he said, pulling the phone from the side pocket. He looked at the screen and frowned. It was Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer. Sterling knew better than to interrupt a Friday morning golf game unless it was an absolute emergency. Derek stepped away from the group, walking toward the edge of a sand trap before answering. What is it? Sterling, he answered, keeping his voice hushed but sharp. I am in the middle of a round with the judge. This better be important. Derek, you need to get off the course right now. Mr. Sterling's voice lacked all of its usual measured professional calm. He sounded out of breath, terrified even. The tone sent an immediate icy spike of adrenaline straight through Derek's chest. What are you talking about? Derek asked, his grip tightening on the phone. Your accounts are frozen. Derek? Mr. Sterling said, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. All of them. I just received a massive data dump of legal notices from the county clerk's office and your banking institutions. A private equity firm called Obsidian Capital just executed a comprehensive lien on everything you own. Derek stopped breathing. The warm morning air suddenly felt freezing. What do you mean, everything? I mean everything, Derek, Mr. Sterling shouted through the receiver. Your checking accounts, your savings, the Dubois estate, your primary residence, and your entire pension fund. It is all locked. Obsidian Capital holds the paper on a bridged debt consolidation loan that went into immediate default. You owe $6.4 million by Friday. If that capital is not wired to their holding accounts, they will seize the properties and drain the pension. Derek dropped his golf club. It clattered against the path. The judge and the senator looked over their expressions, shifting from relaxed amusement to genuine concern. 6 million. Derek choked out the number, tasting like ash in his mouth. That is impossible. I did not authorize any loan. I did not pledge my pension. There is a mistake, Sterling. Call the bank and tell them it is a clerical error. It is not an error, Derek, Mr. Sterling replied, his voice cracking with dread. I am looking at the collateral pledge right now. It has your certified digital signature. It has Vivian's signature. It was stamped with your power of attorney. You legally handed them the right to freeze your assets upon default. You need to get home and find your son-in-law right now. The phone slipped slightly in Derek's sweating hand. Terrence. The bridge loan. The hushed conversation in the dining room. The pieces violently slammed together in his mind, forming a picture of absolute total ruin. 40 years of climbing the corporate ladder, 40 years of sacrificing his weekends and his health to build a bulletproof retirement, and it was gone, erased by a single digital signature. Derek did not say goodbye. He hung up the phone. He did not look at the judge or the senator. He simply turned around and began walking toward the clubhouse. His walk turned into a jog and then a full frantic sprint. He left his expensive clubs sitting on the grass. He reached his Mercedes-Benz, tearing the door open and throwing himself into the driver's seat. His hands shook so violently he could barely push the ignition button. The engine roared to life and Derek slammed his foot on the accelerator. The heavy luxury sedan tore out of the country club parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving a trail of blue smoke behind. The drive back to the Dubois estate was a blur of sheer panic and escalating rage. Derek ran 3 red lights, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every time he blinked, he saw the number, 6.4 million. He was a wealthy man, but he was not liquid for $6 million. No one in his circle was. If the accounts were frozen, he could not even buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a defense team to fight a corporate giant like Obsidian Capital. He swerved into the long circular driveway of the estate, the tires tearing up the perfectly manicured gravel. He threw the car into park before it had even fully stopped leaping out and leaving the door wide open. He stormed up the front steps and kicked the heavy oak front door open. It crashed against the interior wall with the sound of a gunshot echoing through the massive empty foyer. Terrence. Derek roared, his voice completely stripped of its usual refined dignity. It was a primal, violent scream. Terrence, get out here right now! From the kitchen, Terrence emerged holding a ceramic coffee mug and a tablet, looking mildly annoyed at the disruption. He was wearing his custom-tailored trousers and a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the wealthy financial manager he pretended to be. Dad, what is all the yelling? Terrence asked, taking a sip of his coffee. The contractors are on their way to look at the roof for the cigar lounge. You need to keep it down. Derek did not speak. The sight of Terrence's arrogant, relaxed face completely snapped whatever thin thread of restraint Derek had left. He crossed the foyer in 3 massive strides. Before Terrence could even register the danger, Derek lunged at him. Derek grabbed Terrence by the collar of his expensive shirt and drove him backward. The coffee mug flew out of Terrence's hand, shattering against the marble floor and sending hot brown liquid splattering across the baseboards. Derek slammed Terrence against the wall with such force that a heavy gold-framed mirror rattled and crashed to the ground, sending shards of glass everywhere. What did you do? Derek screamed, spittle flying from his lips. His hands gripped Terrence's throat and collar, pinning him helplessly against the drywall. What did you do to my pension? Terrence gagged, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He dropped the tablet, raising his hands, desperately trying to pry Derek's fingers away. Dad, stop! He choked out, his face turning a dark shade of red. Let me explain. Explain what? Derek roared, shaking the younger man violently. Sterling just called me. My accounts are frozen. The pension is gone. The house is gone. You forged my signature, you worthless coward. You stole my life. Jasmine came running down the grand staircase, her silk robe trailing behind her. She took one look at the scene in the foyer and let out a piercing scream. Dad, stop it! She shrieked, throwing herself down the final few steps and rushing toward them. You are going to kill him! Jasmine grabbed Derek's arm, pulling with all her might, but the older man was fueled by pure adrenaline and rage. He did not budge. He kept Terrence pinned to the wall, staring into the eyes of the man who had destroyed his legacy. He signed away our home, Derek yelled at Jasmine, not breaking eye contact with Terrence. He took out a $6 million loan with a firm called Obsidian Capital, and he used my life savings as collateral. They are foreclosing on everything today. We have nothing. Jasmine froze, her hands dropping from Derek's arm. The blood drained entirely from her face. She knew exactly what had happened. She was the one who had clicked approve on her mother's email. She looked at Terrence, who was still gasping for air, his perfect facade completely shattered. It was a bridge loan, Terrence wheezed, looking frantically between Derek and Jasmine. I was going to pay it back. I just needed 90 days. Obsidian Capital must have bought the debt to force a hostile takeover. It is illegal for them to freeze the accounts without a proper hearing. I will kill you, Derek whispered, his voice dropping into a deadly, terrifying register. I will strangle you with my bare hands, Derek. What is going on? The sharp, authoritative voice of my mother, Vivian, cut through the chaos. She stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the wooden banister, her face pale, but her posture rigid. She walked slowly down the stairs, stepping carefully over the shattered glass, and spilled coffee in the foyer. Derek let him go. Vivian commanded her tone, leaving absolutely no room for argument. We do not behave like street thugs in this house. Derek slowly released his grip, his chest heaving as he stepped back. Terrence slumped against the wall, coughing violently and rubbing his bruised neck. Vivian, Derek said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. We do not have a house anymore. Terrence committed fraud. He pledged the estate and the pension to a corporate equity firm. They froze all our assets this morning. We are ruined, Vivian. Vivian stood in the center of the ruined foyer, looking at the broken mirror, the spilled coffee, her weeping daughter, and her gasping son-in-law. For a brief second, the terrifying reality of the situation threatened to break through her armor. But Vivian Dubois had spent her entire life protecting her social status. She was completely incapable of accepting defeat. She retreated instantly into the only defense mechanism she knew, pure delusion. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. That is absolutely ridiculous! Vivian snapped, her voice ringing with misplaced authority. We are the Dubois family. We have lived in this city for generations. My grandfather built the first Black-owned bank in this district. No faceless corporate entity is going to send an email and take my home. Vivian. They have the signatures, Derek pleaded, gesturing helplessly. They have the law on their side. They have nothing, Vivian countered sharply. They are trying to scare us because they think we are weak. Well, they picked the wrong family. We are going to go down to this Obsidian Capital today. We are going to demand to see their chief executive officer face to face. We will threaten them with the largest defamation and harassment lawsuit this state has ever seen. Vivian turned to Terrence, who was still cowering against the wall. Terrence, go upstairs and put on your best suit, she ordered. Jasmine, fix your makeup. Derek, get the car ready. We are going to put these corporate vultures in their place and remind them exactly who they are dealing with. The heavy oak door clicked open. Every single eye in the massive glass-walled boardroom immediately shifted toward the entrance. The room was a testament to modern architectural power, designed to intimidate anyone who walked inside. The floors were black marble polished to a mirror finish. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the sprawling Atlanta skyline. Derek sat up straighter, resting his weathered hands firmly on his silver-tipped cane. Vivian adjusted her designer posture, preparing her most charming and intimidating fake smile. Terrence wiped a bead of cold sweat from his forehead completely, ready to spout empty legal jargon to whoever walked through that door. Jasmine simply held her breath, expecting an older, intimidating white billionaire in a pinstripe suit to walk in and apologize for the terrible misunderstanding regarding their accounts. Instead, I walked in. I was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue suit that easily cost more than Terrence's leased Porsche. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor, echoing through the dead silence of the massive room. I carried a single thick black leather portfolio, I did not look anything like the discarded, helpless daughter they had kicked out of the family 5 years ago. I looked like the corporate executioner they never saw coming. I walked directly to the massive high-backed leather chair at the head of the obsidian table. I did not smile. I did not offer a polite greeting. I simply set the portfolio down with a precise, deliberate motion and looked at the four shocked faces staring back at me. "Have a seat," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of warmth. "We have a lot of debt to discuss." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that happens right before a building completely collapses. Derek stared at me, his jaw slightly parted, his hands trembling visibly on his cane. Jasmine looked as though she had just seen a ghost, the color entirely draining from her carefully contoured face. Terrence sank back into his heavy leather chair, his eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for hidden cameras or a trapdoor. Vivian, however, refused to process the reality right in front of her. Her brain immediately rejected the image of her scapegoat daughter sitting in the seat of absolute power. She let out a sharp, dismissive scoff, waving her manicured hand in the air. "Kendra, what on earth are you doing here?" Vivian snapped, her voice laced with the exact same condescending venom she had used my entire life. "Have you lost your mind playing some kind of sick practical joke on us today of all days? Go get your boss right now. We are not here to speak with an administrative assistant or a coffee girl. We are here to see the Chief Executive Officer of Obsidian Capital, and we demand to see him immediately." I did not blink. I slowly unbuttoned my suit jacket and sat down in the executive chair, leaning back and resting my hands calmly on the armrests. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Obsidian Capital," I said, my tone perfectly level and echoing across the long table. "I founded this firm 5 years ago. I built it from the ground up while you were busy bragging to your church friends about your fraudulent son-in-law. There is no older white man coming through that door to save you, Mom. There is only me." Terrence suddenly shot up out of his chair, pointing a trembling, sweaty finger at me. "This is illegal," he shouted, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of his own failures. "You set up a fake corporate entity to extort your own family. I will have the State Bar Association look into this immediately. I will have the Federal Trade Commission shut this entire building down by tomorrow morning. You cannot just freeze our assets, Kendra." I looked at Terrence with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. "Terrence, you do not even know what the Federal Trade Commission does," I replied coldly, my voice easily overpowering his frantic shouting. "And Obsidian Capital is very real. We just closed a $50 million funding round last quarter. We manage a portfolio of over $200 million in distressed assets. We are the ghost in the machine that buys up bad debt from careless, arrogant fools who try to play high finance without the actual capital to back it up. Fools exactly like you." Terrence's face went completely pale. He slowly lowered his shaking hand and collapsed back into his seat. He worked in the fringes of wealth management, so he knew the rumors. Everyone in the Atlanta financial sector knew about Obsidian Capital. They knew it was a ruthless shadow firm that acquired bad loans and liquidated assets without an ounce of mercy. The horrifying realization that the phantom chief executive who had systematically hunted down his debt was the sister-in-law he had mocked was finally sinking into his thick skull. Derek leaned forward, gripping the edge of the polished obsidian table. His eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and profound confusion. "Kendra," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "How is this possible? You dropped out of the corporate world. You had absolutely nothing when you left our house." "I did not drop out, Dad," I corrected him, keeping my voice steady and surgical. "I refused to work in a toxic corporate environment that rewarded nepotism and blind loyalty over actual skill. I started a private equity fund. I spent the last 5 years working 18-hour days, auditing ledgers, negotiating brutal acquisitions, and building genuine generational wealth. I did the exact thing you constantly praise Terrence for supposedly doing, except I actually did it in the real world." I reached forward and opened the black leather portfolio. I pulled out the massive stack of financial documents that Elijah had prepared for me. While I was building an empire, I continued spreading the papers across the table. Your golden boy was busy digging a massive grave for the Dubois legacy. Let us review the numbers since Terrence is suddenly so quiet. 2 years ago, Terrence took out a $4 million balloon loan from a high-risk shadow bank. He told you it was for developing luxury townhomes on the estate grounds. He lied to your face. Jasmine sat up straight, her eyes flashing with a sudden defensive anger. "Do not call my husband a liar," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual arrogant sting. "He used that money to invest in our future. He bought us access to the right elite networks." I pulled a specific expense ledger from the stack and slid it directly toward her. "He bought you a membership to the Oak Ridge Country Club for $100,000, I read aloud from the sheet, my eyes locked onto hers. "He leased 3 separate Porsche SUVs. He spent over $200,000 funding your fake charity galas so you could take pictures with your sorority sisters and pretend you were a massive philanthropist. He used the historic Dubois estate as a personal piggy bank to fund a lifestyle neither of you could actually afford to maintain." Jasmine looked down at the ledger, her breath hitching in her throat. She could not deny the numbers staring back at her. They were printed out in undeniable black and white, highlighting every single frivolous purchase she had made over the last 2 years. And when the shadow bank finally came to collect, I continued turning my attention back to my father. Terrence, completely panicked. He realized he had spent all the money and had absolutely no way to pay the principal balance. So he scrambled to find a private broker willing to issue a 90-day bridge loan. He desperately needed a lifeline to stop the immediate foreclosure of the estate before you found out. Derek looked at Terrence, his face etched with absolute disgust and betrayal. "You absolute idiot," Derek muttered under his breath, his hands gripping his cane until his knuckles turned white. "It gets worse, Dad," I said, leaning forward and resting my arms on the cold table. The private brokerage firm Terrence approached was a subsidiary shell company wholly owned by Obsidian Capital. He walked right into my trap blindly. He essentially consolidated his bad debt directly into my hands. And because the estate was already in default, the underwriting terms for the new loan were intentionally catastrophic. Vivian had been sitting in stunned silence, staring blankly at the polished table, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of the disaster. She finally looked up, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading panic. "Kendra," she whispered, her voice trembling and fragile. "You cannot do this to us. We are your family. You are my daughter. You cannot take our home away." I stared at the woman who had made my entire childhood a miserable exercise in seeking unrequited love. "5 years ago in Mr. Sterling's office, you slid a crisp $1 bill across the table to me." I reminded her, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. "You looked me in the eye and told me I was a liability. You told me I was your biggest disappointment. You told me never to use the Dubois name to ask for a favor or a handout. Do you remember saying that, Mom?" Vivian squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear slipping down her perfectly powdered cheek. "I was angry," she sobbed, covering her mouth. "I did not mean it, Kendra." "You meant every single word of it," I fired back, refusing to let her play the victim in a situation she created. "You threw me away because I did not fit your perfect high society narrative. You gave everything to Jasmine and Terrence because they looked the part and wore the right clothes. You handed them a $6 million legacy, and they burned it to the ground in 5 short years. Now you are sitting in my building begging for the very mercy you coldly denied me." Terrence suddenly slammed his hands on the table, trying to muster one last pathetic display of masculine authority. "Fine," he yelled, his face red with desperation and anger. "You own the debt. Congratulations, Kendra, you win the game. But you cannot freeze our accounts without a court order. We will drag this out in litigation for years if we have to. We will file for bankruptcy protection tomorrow. You will never see a single dime of that money, and you will never get your hands on the estate." I looked at Terrence, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a hunter watching its prey walk directly into a steel snare. "Terrence," I said softly, tapping my manicured fingernail against the top document in the portfolio. "You really should have read the fine print before you stamped those papers, because you did not just sign a standard bridge loan agreement to save your pride." I pulled out the collateral pledge document and the cybersecurity forensic report that Elijah had given me the night before. I laid them side by side in the exact center of the table where all 4 of them could see the text clearly. "This is where your little game ends, Terrence." I said, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees as the final trap prepared to snap shut. I pressed the silver button on my desk console. The heavy automated blinds descended over the floor to ceiling windows, sealing us inside a dimly lit chamber of absolute accountability. A massive high-definition projector screen dropped silently from the ceiling directly behind my chair. Derek stared at the screen and then back at me. The cane slipped completely from his grasp, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. He fell back into his heavy leather executive chair, the last remaining shreds of his proud patriarch facade crumbling. "That is impossible," he whispered, his voice barely carrying across the expansive table. "You cannot be the one pulling these strings, Kendra. You just cannot be." Vivian slammed her hands flat against the obsidian marble top. Her perfectly styled hair trembled as she leaned forward, her face flushed with a desperate, furious denial. "This is a sick joke," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the glass walls. "You hacked into their system, did you not? You are just a secretary, playing a vicious game to get back at us for what happened 5 years ago. I am not going to sit here and be terrorized by a bitter administrative assistant. I want the real chief executive officer in this room right now before I call the police." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch at her insults. The days of craving my mother's validation were long gone, replaced by a cold, calculating discipline. I picked up the sleek presentation remote resting next to my portfolio. I clicked the remote. The projector flared to life, illuminating the dark room with a glaring white light. Across the massive screen, Terrence's private bank records appeared in sharp, undeniable detail. Every hidden account, every offshore transfer, every reckless expenditure he had tried to bury was now broadcasted in 10-foot-tall letters. "I own Obsidian Capital." "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical shouting like a scalpel. "I built this empire while you were busy pretending your son-in-law was a financial genius. And because I own this firm, I also own the $6.4 million in high-yield debt that Terrence racked up playing pretend billionaire." I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted, displaying the official mortgage deeds and the newly executed liens. "I own the mortgage on the Dubois estate." I continued, locking my eyes onto Vivian's terrified face. "I own the lien on your primary retirement house. I own the frozen assets in Dad's pension fund. There is no one else coming through that door. There is no higher authority you can complain to. You are looking at the judge, the jury, and the executioner of the Dubois legacy." Terrence buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic whimpering sound. He knew the numbers on the screen were real. He knew I had completely cornered him. But Jasmine could not accept defeat. She had spent her entire life being the golden child, the untouchable princess of the family. She surged out of her chair, her designer heels scraping harshly against the floor. "You set us up!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You knew we were desperate, and you manipulated the market to trap us. You are nothing but a predatory bitch, Kendra. You intentionally ruined our lives just because you were jealous of my marriage and my success." I cut her off instantly. My hand slammed down on the table with a sharp crack that made Jasmine flinch backward. "Your success," I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. "You do not have any success, Jasmine. You have a mountain of debt and a husband who lies to you. But I did not force Terrence to borrow money from a shadow bank. I did not force him to buy you diamond tennis bracelets while the property taxes went unpaid." I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the thick, sealed folder containing the cybersecurity diagnostic report. I tossed it across the smooth marble table. It slid and stopped exactly in front of Jasmine's manicured hands. "And I certainly did not forge Dad's signature to steal his pension, Jasmine," I said, my tone dropping into a deadly whisper. "You and Terrence did." The air in the boardroom completely stagnated. Derek, who had been staring blankly at the projector screen, slowly turned his head to look at his golden daughter. Vivian stopped breathing, her hands frozen halfway to her face. "What are you talking about?" Derek asked, his voice trembling with a new horrifying realization. Jasmine had nothing to do with the bridge loan. Terrence handled the paperwork. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen split in half. On the left side, the massive digital collateral pledge appeared bearing the perfectly forged signatures of Derek and Vivian Dubois. On the right side, a dense block of technical IP logs and device registry data illuminated the room. Terrence told you the lender needed a bridge loan, I explained, leaning back in my chair and steepling my fingers. What he did not tell you is that because of his prior defaults, the underwriter required a full unconditional pledge of your home and your pension. Terrence knew you would never agree to those terms, Dad, so he decided to bypass your consent entirely. Derek looked at Terrence. Terrence shrank away, pressing himself into the corner of his chair, unable to meet his father-in-law's eyes. The digital signature for Vivian Dubois was executed precisely at 2:14 on Sunday afternoon. I read aloud, gesturing to the data on the screen. It was approved from an Apple iPhone registered directly to Jasmine Dubois. The physical power of attorney stamp verifying your signature, Dad, was executed from Terrence's laptop. I paused, letting the undeniable weight of the evidence crush the last remaining delusions in the room. They committed federal wire fraud, I stated plainly. They committed felony elder abuse against their own parents. They illegally pledged the roof over your head and the money you spent 40 years earning just so Jasmine could keep wearing designer labels and Terrence could keep playing golf at the country club. They sold your entire future to save their own egos. Derek let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. It was the sound of a proud man having his heart physically ripped from his chest. He looked at Jasmine, the daughter he had worshipped, the daughter he had chosen over me time and time again. Jasmine, tell me this is a lie. Derek pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Tell me you did not sign away my house. Jasmine was trembling uncontrollably. She looked at the technical data on the screen and then at the terrifying cybersecurity folder sitting on the table in front of her. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic squeak came out. She looked at Terrence, desperate for him to intervene, to use his smooth talking charm to fix the nightmare. But Terrence was completely broken. I did not know what I was signing. Jasmine finally cried out, bursting into heavy, dramatic tears. Terrence just told me to click a button. He said it was the only way to save the estate. He told me it was a temporary hold. I did not read the contract, Dad. I swear to God I did not know it was the pension. Terrence suddenly snapped his head up, his survival instincts kicking in. Do not put this all on me, Terrence shouted, his voice cracking. You knew exactly what we were doing, Jasmine. You knew we were broke. You told me you would rather die than go back to your sorority sisters and admit we had no money. You clicked the button. You authorized the wire. You told me it was safe, Jasmine screamed back, slapping her hands against the table. You are the financial manager. You ruined us. Vivian watched the two of them tear each other apart. The perfect marriage, the golden couple she had paraded around Atlanta high society for years, was dissolving into a vicious, pathetic brawl right in front of her eyes. Her perfect daughter was a fraud. Her perfect son-in-law was a thief. And the daughter she had thrown away, the one she had handed a $1 bill, was sitting at the head of the table holding the power of a god over all of them. Vivian slowly turned her head and looked at me. For the first time in my entire 32 years of life, I saw genuine fear in my mother's eyes. She was not looking at a disappointment anymore. She was looking at a conqueror. Kendra, Vivian whispered, her voice stripped of all its arrogant armor. What are you going to do to us? I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I watched them sweat. I watched them realize that their entire existence now depended on a single word from my mouth. I had spent my childhood feeling powerless, invisible, and inadequate. But sitting in this chair, surrounded by the undeniable proof of my own brilliance and their utter failure, I felt nothing but absolute clarity. I am going to give you a choice, I said quietly, closing the black leather portfolio. The only choice you have left. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored suit jacket. My fingers brushed against the crisp, folded edge of the $1 bill my mother had given me 5 years ago. I had carried it with me every single day, as a reminder of what they thought I was worth. Soon I would give it back to them. But first they had to understand the exact terms of their surrender. Elijah, I called out, my voice carrying toward the heavy oak door at the back of the room. Bring in the final contracts. It is time to close this acquisition. The door opened, and Elijah stepped into the dimly lit boardroom, carrying two pristine red folders. The final phase of my revenge was about to begin, and there was absolutely no escape for the Dubois family. Elijah walked around the obsidian table, his footsteps completely silent against the marble floor. He placed one pristine red folder directly in front of my father, and the second red folder directly in front of my mother. He did not say a word. He simply stepped back and stood beside my chair perfectly still like a shadow waiting for a command. I picked up the presentation remote and clicked the button one more time. The massive projector screen shifted from the technical IP logs to a highly detailed forensic handwriting analysis. It was a side-by-side comparison that left absolutely no room for interpretation or denial. On the left side of the screen was my father Derek's actual signature pulled from decades of legitimate tax returns and banking documents. The strokes were rigid, precise, and slanted sharply to the right. On the right side of the screen was the signature stamped onto the fraudulent collateral pledge. Look closely at the screen, I instructed, my voice echoing in the dead quiet of the boardroom. The signature on the right was executed using the physical power of attorney stamp. But the forensic analysis clearly shows the microscopic indentations and the uneven ink distribution caused by a trembling hand. A hand belonging to a man who knew he was committing a federal crime. Your hand, Terrence. I clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in on the digital signature section. Beneath Vivian's forged name was a string of alphanumeric characters. That is a device registry code, I explained, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. When you digitally sign a binding federal financial document, the underwriting software automatically pings the device used to execute the signature. It records the exact geographic coordinates, the Internet Protocol address, and the registered owner of the hardware. The device that signed away your primary home, Mom, was an Apple iPhone registered to Jasmine Dubois. The geographic coordinates placed that phone inside the Dubois estate home office at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon last Sunday. There was nowhere for them to hide. The undeniable proof of federal fraud was staring my parents right in the face in high definition. The reality of their situation crashed down on them with the crushing weight of a collapsing skyscraper. They had spent their entire lives cultivating an image of absolute perfection. They had groomed Jasmine to be the flawless socialite, and they had welcomed Terrence as the ultimate financial prodigy. They had sacrificed their relationship with me to protect that fabricated legacy. And now the two people they had worshipped were sitting next to them, exposed as common criminals who had stolen their life savings. Derek began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved erratically, pulling in short, shallow gasps of air that did nothing to fill his lungs. He slumped forward, resting his elbows on the polished marble table and burying his face in his trembling hands. The silver-tipped cane he had used to project authority his entire life lay forgotten on the floor. He was completely broken. He looked up slowly, his bloodshot eyes darting between Jasmine and Terrence. His gaze finally settled on me. I sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed, wearing a suit that cost more than Terrence's car, surrounded by the empire I had built with my own two hands. The contrast was brutal and unavoidable. The daughter he had called a failure, the daughter he had cast out with a $1 bill, was now a titan of industry. The golden child and the perfect son-in-law had completely destroyed the family legacy, while the outcast daughter had quietly built an untouchable corporate fortress. My pension. Derek choked out, his voice barely a whisper. 40 years of my life. You threw it away. You threw my life away for a country club membership. Vivian, who had spent her entire existence denying any flaw in her perfect family, finally snapped. The walls of her delusion shattered completely, leaving behind nothing but pure, raw agony. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark streaks across her cheeks. She turned her head slowly, locking her eyes onto Jasmine. "How could you?" Vivian screamed, her voice tearing through the silent boardroom like a physical weapon. "We gave you everything, Jasmine. We paid for your degrees. We funded your weddings. We handed you a $6 million estate on a silver platter. We gave you the entire world, and you stole my house. You stole the roof over my head." Jasmine shrank back into her heavy leather chair, her entire body shaking violently. She looked like a terrified child stripped of all her arrogant armor and designer confidence. "Mom, please," she sobbed, holding her hands up defensively. "Terrence told me it was the only way. He said we would lose the estate if I did not click the button. I was just trying to save our name. I did not want the church elders to know we were broke." "You stupid, selfish girl!" Vivian shrieked, slamming her fists against the table. "You ruined us! You are going to federal prison, and you are going to take us down with you." Terrence heard the word prison, and his survival instincts violently kicked in. He had spent his entire life manipulating people to climb the social ladder. He was a coward who hid behind expensive clothes and fake charity galas. Now facing the absolute certainty of a federal indictment and a decade in a concrete cell, his loyalty completely evaporated. He looked at the forensic evidence on the screen and realized I had them completely dead to rights. There was no legal loophole. There was no high society connection that could save him from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Terrence stood up so fast his heavy leather chair tipped over backward and crashed against the glass wall. "I did not do the digital signatures," Terrence shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at Jasmine's face. "She did it. Jasmine did the digital signatures." Jasmine stopped crying instantly. She stared at her husband, her blue eyes wide with absolute disbelief. The man who had promised to protect her, the man who had dragged her into this massive financial grave, was now standing in a corporate boardroom, desperately trying to feed her to the wolves. "What are you doing?" Jasmine whispered, her voice trembling with a new horrifying realization. "I told her not to do it," Terrence yelled, turning his frantic gaze toward me and Elijah. "I swear to God, I told her it was illegal. She took my laptop. She took the power of attorney stamp. She was the one who clicked approve on the email. I will testify against her. I will tell the federal prosecutors everything they want to know. Just give me immunity. I will give you Jasmine." The room erupted. The perfect marriage, the golden couple that Vivian had paraded around Atlanta high society for years, dissolved into a vicious feral brawl right in front of our eyes. Jasmine let out a sound that was not entirely human. It was a primal shriek of pure rage and ultimate betrayal. She lunged across the space between them, completely abandoning any pretense of upper-class dignity. "You lying coward," Jasmine screamed. She swung her arm with all her strength. Her hand connected with Terrence's face in a devastating open palm slap that echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot. Terrence's head snapped to the side, his expensive glasses flying off his face and skidding across the polished marble floor. He stumbled backward, holding his reddening cheek, completely stunned by the physical assault. Jasmine did not stop. She launched herself at him, grabbing the lapels of his custom-tailored suit and violently shaking him. "You forced me to do it!" she shrieked, tearing at his shirt. "You spent all the money. You bought the cars. You took the loans. I will kill you, Terrence. I will kill you before I let you send me to prison." Terrence grabbed her wrists, trying to shove her away. "Get off me, you crazy bitch!" he yelled, struggling to break her grip. "You are the one who needed the charity galas. You are the one who needed the designer clothes to impress your stupid sorority sisters. You drained the accounts, Jasmine." Derek and Vivian watched in absolute horror as their perfect children physically tore each other apart in the center of the room. Derek clutched his chest, his breathing becoming even more erratic, his face turning a dangerous shade of pale gray. Vivian covered her face with her hands, sobbing hysterically, unable to look at the violent destruction of her entire world. Elijah stepped forward slightly, his muscles tensing, ready to intervene if the brawl escalated toward the massive glass windows. I simply raised my hand, stopping him. I did not want him to intervene. I wanted to watch every single second of it. I sat in my high-backed leather chair, completely motionless, watching the physical manifestation of their ruined legacy. For 22 years, I had been forced to sit at the end of the table and watch them pretend to be perfect. I had been forced to listen to them praise Terrence and worship Jasmine. I had swallowed their insults and endured their mockery. Now the illusion was entirely shattered. The masks were off. They were exactly what I had always known them to be: greedy, selfish cowards who would sacrifice their own flesh and blood to save themselves. "Sit down," I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it carried a deadly absolute authority that instantly cut through the chaos. Jasmine and Terrence froze. They released each other, panting heavily, their clothes wrinkled and torn, their faces flushed with rage and terror. They looked at me, the outcast daughter sitting on her throne, holding the keys to their complete destruction. I said, "Sit down!" I repeated, my eyes locking onto Terrence's terrified face. Terrence slowly reached down and picked up his heavy leather chair. He righted it and collapsed into the seat, wiping a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth. Jasmine stood trembling for a moment before sinking back into her own chair, wrapping her arms around herself, as if trying to hold her shattered reality together. The boardroom descended back into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the ragged, terrified breathing of my family. I looked at the four of them, broken, humiliated, and completely at my mercy. The first 9 sections of my revenge had been executed flawlessly. They had been exposed, stripped of their wealth, and confronted with their crimes. But the final phase, the actual transaction that would permanently sever my ties to them and secure my total victory, was just beginning. I reached forward and rested my hands on the 2 pristine red folders that Elijah had placed on the table. The time for screaming and slapping was over. It was time for them to pay the ultimate price. Now that we have established exactly who is responsible for the $6 million fraud, I said smoothly, my voice echoing in the dim light, I am going to explain exactly how this ends. Because neither of you are leaving this building until one of these folders is signed. The 2 red folders sat perfectly aligned on the polished black marble. I let my hand fall flat against the table with a loud, sharp crack. The sound was like a gavel striking a block, instantly snapping whatever remaining fragments of defiance existed in the room. Jasmine flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. Terrence stared blankly at the floor. Derek and Vivian looked at me with the wide, terrified eyes of people who had finally realized they were standing on a trap door. 5 years ago, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that commanded absolute attention. You sat in Mr. Sterling's office and made a conscious decision to erase me from this family. You handed me a single $1 bill. You looked me in the eye and you told me I was a liability. And then, Mom, you gave me a very specific piece of advice. Do you remember what it was? Vivian could not speak. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her hands shaking violently in her lap. You told me never to use the Dubois family name to ask for money. I continued, leaning forward so she had nowhere to look but directly into my eyes. You told me never to use your legacy to beg for a favor. You cast me out to protect your perfect social image. And now look at where we are. You are sitting in a skyscraper that I own inside a company that I built, begging for your financial lives. Derek reached out a trembling hand, his fingers curling inward as if grasping for a lifeline that simply did not exist. Please, Kendra. He wept, his voice entirely stripped of the booming patriarchal authority that had dominated my childhood. Please. We are family. You are our daughter. I know we made mistakes, but do not let them take our home. We are too old to start over. Please have mercy on us. I looked at the man who had ignored every single academic achievement I ever earned. I looked at the man who had proudly bought Terrence a luxury sports car while telling me my business degree was a waste of time. I felt no pity. I felt no tug of familial obligation. The emotional connection he was desperately trying to invoke had been severed by his own hands half a decade ago. Family. I repeated the word, tasting bitter and foreign on my tongue. Family protects each other, Dad. Family does not forge signatures to steal pension funds. Family does not cast their children into the street with a $1 bill just because they refuse to join the right country club. You did not treat me like family. You treated me like a bad investment. You liquidated my standing in the Dubois house to maximize Jasmine's social returns. I turned my gaze to Vivian, who was staring at the red folders as if they were explosive devices waiting to detonate. You built your entire identity on being untouchable, Mom, I said softly. You built a kingdom on appearances, but appearances do not pay off high-yield corporate debt. Capital does. And right now, I am the only person in this room who holds any capital. I am not giving you mercy, I announced, straightening my posture and placing my hands flat on top of the red folders. You are not my family today. You are a severely overleveraged portfolio of distressed assets, and I am a private equity chief executive. I am giving you a business transaction. It is the only transaction you will ever get from Obsidian Capital, and it is not open for negotiation. I opened the folder on the left. The crisp white legal documents inside detailed the complete and total destruction of their lives. Option A. I began reading from the top sheet, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Option A is the default path. If you refuse to cooperate, or if you attempt to delay this process by even a single hour, Elijah will immediately transmit this entire dossier to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The dossier includes the forged collateral pledge, the cybersecurity diagnostic report, proving Jasmine executed the signatures, and the financial ledgers detailing Terrence's misappropriation of the balloon loan. Jasmine let out a sharp, terrified gasp, grabbing the edge of the table. No, she whimpered. Kendra, please, you cannot do that. I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes locked on Derek and Vivian. Federal prosecutors have a 98% conviction rate when they have digital forensics of this caliber. I continued surgically dismantling their hopes. Jasmine and Terrence will be formally indicted by Tuesday. Given the dollar amount of the fraud and the fact that it qualifies as felony elder abuse, they will both be sentenced to 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. There will be no probation. There will be no plea deals. Terrence groaned, burying his face in his hands as the reality of federal prison set in. He knew the numbers. He knew the legal system tore apart amateur fraudsters like him every single day. But option A does not stop with criminal charges, I said, turning a page in the red folder. Because the loan is in default, Obsidian Capital will execute the liens. By Monday morning, the county sheriff will arrive at the Dubois estate to officially evict you. The locks will be changed. Your belongings will be placed on the curb. Next, the bank will completely drain Dad's pension fund to cover the initial penalties. And finally, your primary retirement home will be seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder. Vivian let out a heartbreaking sob, covering her face with her shaking hands. She pictured her wealthy church friends driving past her house and seeing foreclosure signs on the front lawn. She pictured the social ruin, the gossip, the absolute destruction of everything she held dear. You will be entirely homeless by Monday, I stated, the brutal fact hanging in the cold boardroom air. You will have no money. You will have no assets. You will have no daughters, because one will be sitting in a concrete cell and the other will be the architect of your ruin. That is option A. It is clean, it is legally airtight, and it requires absolutely no further action on my part. I simply walk out of this room and let the legal system devour you. Derek stared at the open folder, his chest heaving. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. He slowly raised his head, his eyes filled with a desperate, hollow terror. The patriarchal facade he had carefully maintained since I was a little girl had been utterly demolished. He was no longer the proud man playing golf with state senators. He was just an old man, realizing he was about to lose the only things that ever gave him value in this world. And what is in the other folder? Derek asked, his voice cracking on every single syllable. He gestured weakly toward the table, his hand trembling so badly he could barely keep it lifted. What is option B, Kendra? Please tell me there is a way to stop this. I slowly closed the first red folder, sealing away the threat of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I moved my hand to the second red folder, resting my palm flat against the smooth crimson surface. The room was so incredibly quiet that I could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of the city traffic hundreds of feet below us. The power dynamic in the room had shifted permanently and irreversibly. There was no more arrogance. There was no more high society superiority. The golden child was a confirmed felon. The perfect son-in-law was an exposed coward. And the proud, arrogant parents were completely destitute, facing the terrifying reality of the streets. They had been thoroughly broken down and systematically stripped of everything they valued in this life. I looked at the second red folder. This was the exact payoff I had been meticulously planning for 5 long years. This was the moment the scales of justice would be permanently tipped in my favor. I had audited them from the shadows. I had outworked them while they slept. And I had cornered them without them ever seeing me coming. Now it was finally time to finalize the most important acquisition of my entire corporate career. I looked at Jasmine, who was staring at the second folder with wide, tear-filled eyes, silently praying for a miracle. I looked at Terrence, who was sweating profusely through his ruined custom suit. I looked at my mother and father, who were holding their breath, waiting for me to pronounce their final sentence. I pulled the thick stack of legal documents out of the second red folder. I slid them slowly to the exact center of the obsidian table, placing them directly under the harsh glare of the projector light. Option B. I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a freshly sharpened blade, is the exact opposite of mercy. Option B is complete and total surrender. The room was dead silent. It was the kind of heavy silence that follows a crash. Terrence was openly crying now. The arrogant facade melted away, leaving a terrified coward weeping into his ruined custom suit. His shoulders shook with every pathetic sob echoing off the glass walls of the boardroom. Jasmine was shaking uncontrollably, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the obsidian table so tightly her knuckles were stark white. She stared at the red folder as if it contained a live explosive device. Vivian looked absolutely terrified, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for a savior that did not exist. The arrogant high society matriarch was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her impending ruin. They were completely broken and utterly defeated by their own greed. I rested my hand on the second red folder and slowly flipped it open. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents meticulously drafted by Elijah and his team of corporate attorneys. I slid the paperwork forward, pushing it directly into the center of the table, where the harsh glare of the projector illuminated every single devastating clause. Option B is very simple, I said, my voice steady and unforgiving. You are going to sign these documents right now. The moment your ink touches this paper, they legally transfer 100% ownership of the Dubois estate into my name. They also transfer full ownership of your primary retirement home into my name. You forfeit everything to me. Every brick, every blade of grass, every piece of antique furniture, and every dollar currently locked inside Dad's pension fund becomes the sole legal property of Obsidian Capital. Derek stared at the documents, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The Dubois estate was the crown jewel of his entire existence. It was the physical manifestation of his legacy, the property his father had fought tooth and nail to secure during a time when the world was entirely stacked against him. He had planned to pass it down to Jasmine to keep the generational wealth flowing through his favorite child. Now he was being forced to hand it over to the daughter he had publicly labeled a complete failure. There will be no trusts, I continued, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. There will be no delayed transfers. The deeds will be executed and recorded with the county clerk before the end of the business day. You are walking out of this building with absolutely no legal claim to the Dubois name or assets. Vivian let out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest. But my house, she whispered, her voice barely audible. All my things are there. My social clubs meet there. Where are we supposed to go, Kendra? I looked at her without any sympathy. You will go to the 2-bedroom condominium I mentioned earlier, I replied coldly. I have already secured the lease in a discreet working-class neighborhood far away from your precious country club friends. You will live quietly. You will learn how to cook your own meals and clean your own floors because you will no longer have the funds to hire help. You built your entire life around showing off your wealth to people who do not actually care about you. Now you are going to learn what it feels like to be completely invisible to the elite society you worshipped your whole life. I turned my attention away from my parents and locked eyes with Jasmine and Terrence. The two of them instinctively shrank back into their heavy leather chairs, terrified of what I was about to say. In exchange for your total forfeiture, I will wipe the $6.4 million debt completely clean, I stated. I will absorb the loss into Obsidian Capital's distressed asset portfolio. I will also permanently bury the cybersecurity forensic report and the forged collateral pledges. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will never see the IP logs. You will not be indicted for federal wire fraud. You will not face felony elder abuse charges. You will not spend the next decade of your lives locked inside a federal penitentiary, eating off metal trays and wearing jumpsuits. I am giving you your freedom. But that freedom comes with a very specific geographical price tag. Jasmine and Terrence must leave the state of Georgia within 48 hours. I commanded, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper. You will go back to the estate tonight and you will pack exactly one suitcase each. You will take only your clothes. You will not take any jewelry, art, or assets purchased with the fraudulent loan funds. You will surrender the keys to your leased Porsche vehicles to my recovery team tomorrow morning. By Sunday afternoon, you will cross the state line and you will never return. If I ever see either of you in Atlanta again, or if you ever attempt to contact my parents to ask for money, the deal is void. If you violate these terms, the FBI gets the file immediately, and I will personally ensure the federal prosecutors seek the maximum possible sentence for your crimes. Do you understand my conditions? Terrence nodded frantically, tears streaming down his bruised face. Yes, he choked out desperately, wiping his nose. We will leave. We will go anywhere you want. Just please do not send me to prison, Kendra. I cannot go to prison. I will sign whatever you want me to sign right now. He reached across the table, his hand trembling violently as he blindly grabbed for the expensive silver pen resting near the documents. He did not even bother to read the contract. He did not care about the Dubois legacy or the millions of dollars in generational wealth he was signing away. He only cared about saving his own skin. He flipped to the signature page and aggressively scribbled his name on the designated line, his handwriting erratic and panicked. He shoved the paper toward Jasmine. Sign it, he hissed at her, his voice filled with venom. Jasmine stared at the contract. The golden child of the Dubois family was entirely broken. She had spent her whole life believing she was superior to me, simply because she wore the right sorority letters and married a man with the right pedigree. Now that entire illusion was shattered. She picked up the silver pen, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She looked at our mother, seeking one final ounce of validation or rescue. Mom, Jasmine whispered, a tear falling onto the crisp white paper. Tell me what to do. Vivian looked at her favorite daughter, the daughter who had secretly forged her name and stolen her retirement to fund a fake charity gala. Vivian slowly turned her head away, refusing to make eye contact. The ultimate rejection. Jasmine let out a quiet, broken sob and signed her name, completely surrendering her crown. Elijah stepped forward and smoothly slid the signed documents toward my parents. It was their turn. Derek looked at the pen as if it were a venomous snake waiting to strike him. He had spent his entire life building his pride, and now he was being forced to dismantle it piece by piece in front of the daughter he had discarded. He reached out and picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line for a long, agonizing moment. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hollow, devastating sorrow. I am sorry, Kendra, he whispered, his voice cracking. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. I did not respond. Apologies were entirely useless currency in my boardroom. They could not undo the years of emotional neglect, and they certainly could not pay off a debt. Sign the paper, I commanded. Derek pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name, transferring his entire life over to me. He passed the pen to Vivian. My mother took it, her hands trembling violently. She did not speak. She simply stared at the contract, her perfect high society facade completely destroyed. With a shaky, uneven script, she signed her name beside my father's. They had absolutely no choice. It was either total surrender or federal prison. Handing shaking Derek, Vivian, Jasmine, and Terrence signed away everything they had ever owned. Elijah stepped forward and efficiently gathered the executed contracts, organizing them back into the red folder. The transaction was complete. I reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out the crisp folded $1 bill my mother had given me 5 years ago. I slid a single $1 bill across the table to Jasmine. Here is your inheritance, I told her. Exactly 1 month later, the sprawling iron gates of the Dubois estate swung open, not for a high society charity gala or a pretentious country club mixer, but for a fleet of commercial renovation trucks. I parked my car in the circular driveway, stepping out onto the crisp gravel. The morning air was sharp and clear, carrying the promise of a completely new era. I stood in front of the massive brick colonial house, taking a moment to simply look at it. It was no longer a monument to my parents' vanity. It was no longer a stage where my sister played the role of a flawless socialite. It was entirely mine. The transition of power had been brutal but ruthlessly efficient. Jasmine and Terence honored the terms of their surrender because they were too terrified of the alternative. That night, they returned to the estate, packed exactly one suitcase each, and left the keys to their leased Porsche SUVs on the kitchen counter. By the next morning, they were on a cheap commercial flight out of Georgia, entirely stripped of the wealth and status they had stolen. I heard through Elijah that they rented a cramped one-bedroom apartment somewhere in the dreary suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. Terrence is currently working a miserable entry-level sales job, trying to sell cheap life insurance policies over the phone. Jasmine, who once refused to wear anything but the finest designer labels, is now working as a receptionist at a local dental clinic. Their marriage, which was built entirely on a fragile foundation of money and appearances, is rapidly crumbling under the heavy, crushing weight of actual poverty. They turn on each other every single day, blaming one another for the complete collapse of their grand empire. I do not feel even a single ounce of sympathy for them. They built their own prison, and now they have to live inside it forever. As for my parents, their reality check was equally devastating. Derek and Vivian Dubois, the former king and queen of Atlanta high society, are now living in a modest two-bedroom condominium on the far outskirts of the city. I control every single dollar they spend. Every Monday morning, Elijah authorizes a strict, meager allowance transferred directly to a prepaid debit card. It is strictly just enough to cover generic groceries, basic utilities, and essential medications. There is absolutely no room in the budget for country club dues or luxury car leases. They sold my father's precious Mercedes-Benz to cover the outstanding property taxes they owed the city before the final transfer of the estate was fully executed. The social isolation hit my mother the hardest of all. Vivian tried to maintain her elite image, at first showing up to her Sunday church service in her old designer dresses, pretending they had simply decided to downsize for their retirement years. But in the ruthless, unforgiving circles of high society, the distinct smell of bankruptcy is impossible to mask. Her wealthy friends stopped calling. The exclusive invitations to charity dinners completely vanished. The superficial people she had spent 40 long years trying to impress abandoned her the absolute second they realized she had absolutely nothing left to offer them. She sits in her small living room, completely invisible to the world she once ruled, learning the exact same hard, painful lesson about conditional love that she taught me when I was a little girl. I walked up the front steps of the estate and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The interior was already completely transformed. The gaudy antique furniture, the massive oil paintings, and the ridiculous crystal decanters had all been liquidated. The grand formal dining room, where my family once sat and openly mocked my career choices, was completely gone. In its place was a massive open-concept workspace filled with sleek modern desks, bright glass partitions, and interactive digital whiteboards. I was not going to live in this massive house. I was going to use it to fundamentally change the world. The Dubois estate was officially becoming the new headquarters for the Obsidian Incubator. I established a massive corporate grant program specifically designed to fund and mentor businesses run by young Black women who were entirely unsupported by their own families. Women who had been labeled as liabilities. Women who had been cast out for refusing to conform to toxic societal expectations. I was going to give them the capital, the legal protection, and the exact same ruthless financial education I had used to build my corporate empire. We were going to turn the very house that once represented my agonizing oppression into an unbreakable fortress of female empowerment. I walked through the bustling hallways, listening to the loud sounds of construction crews, tearing down the physical walls of my childhood trauma. I watched a group of young, brilliant female entrepreneurs unpacking heavy boxes in the new conference room, laughing brightly, and sharing their ambitious business plans. They were building genuine, sustainable wealth, and they were doing it together without ever apologizing for their fierce ambition. I stepped back out onto the front porch, leaning against the tall white pillars and looking out over the perfectly manicured lawn. The midday sun was shining brightly over the sprawling city of Atlanta. The heavy, crushing weight I had carried in my chest for 32 long years was finally gone, entirely replaced by the unbreakable shining armor of my own massive success. I had taken the absolute worst moments of my entire life and completely weaponized them, turning painful rejection into the ultimate corporate motivation. They say blood is thicker than water, but out in the real world, capital is thicker than blood. When the people who are supposed to protect you try to destroy you, do not cry. You do not beg for their approval. You do not wait for an apology that will never come. You audit them, you outwork them, and then you buy them out. Thank you so much for watching my story today. If you made it this far, you know that standing up to toxic family members is the hardest battle you will ever fight, but it is also the absolute most rewarding. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think I was too harsh on my parents? And more importantly, would you have shown mercy or would you have sent the sister to jail? Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of ultimate payback and undeniable success. Stay strong, stay focused, and remember that your greatest revenge is always your own absolute independence.